Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that's hopefully for somebody. I am your host, Kyle Naranya, crossing off the last Screen Rant Underground originating host off of the list. I am fortunate today, tonight, or this morning to be joined by Kofi Outlaw of comicbook.com.
In my usual fashion, I came in, I just accidentally hit the screen and just knocked myself off the wrong screen of this desktop. So, in my usual fashion, I'm coming in like a true professional. I've done this a number of years, so of course, my first introduction is with the mute button still on, and I can't even reach it 2 desktops away. Hi, I'm Kofi Outlaw.
Kofi, you shouldn't have said anything. That's what editing is for.
Oh no, I try not to lie to people. I just try to let them know how bad I come in and stuff like that. I just like to be transparent with the people about how good or not I am at this actually. But it never seems to matter because I just keep telling people yeah, I'm just gonna keep screwing this up, but they keep coming back. So yeah, here we go. Thank you, Paramount, I guess. Yeah.
Well, that's the perfect segue. We are talking about a Paramount property today, which is thankfully some stuff gets delayed and it makes time for other things. I don't know when I would have had time to fit this into the review schedule that I've made, but it did give me the opportunity to watch through all of Star Trek Strange New World Season 2, which you are joining for. Of course, comicbook.com, if you look into it, is owned by Paramount. But if you are somebody who's listens to other podcasts that Kofi is on, I promise that is not going to affect his opinion whatsoever.
No. The mountain of entertainment is strong with or without my opinion, so I just leave it be. But yeah, I'm happy to get into it, and this is gonna be a fun one.
So, Star Trek Strange New Worlds ended just recently, as a recording, I guess, little over a week ago, date
Yes.
of release. And one thing I want to get into, because so this show we've been going on, this is actually the year recording episode, which is exciting. And because of the release schedule of all the different content, I've never had a chance to talk about my investment into Star Wars, which very quickly was saw some of the TNG movies and then really
Oh,
didn't
you
watch
did
any
what
of
I
the.
did. Yeah, I'm not to interrupt you, but you did what I did. You already said Star Wars.
I did. That's right. Oh, Star Trek. So that should, well, not that one is better than the other. I don't want to get into that argument whatsoever
No, we
for
don't have
any of
to.
the
I just
listeners.
always do it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's why I
Yes.
knew it. I got to be careful. I will
So,
start doing it in this episode too.
but my introduction to Star Trek was those TNG movies. I said Star Trek that time, right? Okay, I
Yeah.
had to check. And so didn't watch any of the other shows and then really didn't get into it until, and I know they're very controversial, the Kelvin timeline films. And then retroactively went through all of the TNG movies and the TOS movies. I've never gone back to those series because, similar to another franchise that a mutual friend of ours, like Ben's love of Doctor Who, eventually there just becomes too much stuff. And even as a fan of the modern Who, I wouldn't recommend anybody go back to the beginning because it's always resetting. And what I appreciated about the Paramount Plus shows with Discovery and then season 2 of Discovery bringing in pre TOS or the original series, if you're unfamiliar with the acronyms for these. That was some, I mean, there may be somebody, I don't know. If you're listening to this, probably not, but who
No,
knows?
no, no, there are, Star Trek requires a whole kind of jargon to it. Yeah, for sure. More so, I did it. I just did it, didn't I?
No, I
Yeah, I
think you
just
said
did it.
Star Trek.
Okay, good. Yeah, there we go. So Star Trek, yeah, I mean, it requires such like much more jargon than Star Wars. Just has like planet names you can't remember and species names you don't try to bother to remember. Star Trek, you actually have to be able to like say things. You got to know it's Enterprise D or E or G, and it's like, yeah,
Star dates are
whew,
actually
yeah,
mentioned.
star dates. Yeah, there's a whole thing to it. So, man, I mean, we're not nuts here. We're just trying to cover our P's and Q's so they don't come for us in the Star Trek fandom.
And so getting into Discovery, which in my opinion kind of fell off with seasons 3 and 4, but the introduction of some of the Strange New Worlds characters was intriguing. And one of the things I like most about the show, while not getting into season 2 yet, is because of its modernization and they just don't care. They're not going to make it look like it's something from the 60s because you wouldn't watch that. You want something with high production value. And my brain, half the time I'm watching Strange New Worlds, is like, this is not a prequel to the Kelvin timeline. This is and they're I don't even know how I want to phrase this because I don't want it to make a shot at Disney, but it's going to sound like one anyways, which is their complete willingness to recast these characters. Kirk's now
Oh
been
yeah.
recast 3 times. Spock
Oh
only
yeah.
only twice, but that's something that I really appreciated. And I was really looking forward to season 2, and I tweeted out my reaction to one of the episodes, but the season as a whole is probably one of my favorite things I've watched this year.
Yeah, I don't think I haven't stepped back yet and like processed it all, but because it just came out and it's like we're not even a bad stretch, but like a just a really our most crowded stretch of content this past summer that we've had since pre-pandemic. So I think it got a little muted in not in like terms of viewership, but just in terms of like getting picked up and talked about, and it's always solid. There's not a whole lot like you can get into except to be like fawning over each episode and doing like a basically a fan podcast for each episode. But yeah, this was pound for pound a one of the best, just consistent, just like boom 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 good stuff Star Trek seasons I've ever seen. And I've watched much of the original series in syndication. I've never sat down and like watched it through. Same reason I can't go back too far. I can't go all the way back to like ColecoVision. You know what I mean? I've watched. I was raised watching Next Generation around the dinner table, so that's like where I got kicked, like indoctrinated into it. And so I started also seeing the original series movies, but I started with the bad ones. Like I saw
The first
like
one,
no, I saw number 5 was the first one I saw in theaters, which is like the undiscovered. Which one is that? Like undiscovered country or something?
The
Anyways,
Final
where they're like
Frontier.
battling Final Frontier, where they're battling God and stuff. Yeah, like that was the first Star Trek movie I ever saw, and I was like, okay, I guess. Then I liked 6 a lot, though. I think 6 is undiscovered country, and I went back and I saw Wrath of Khan, and I caught that on HBO. They used to play that on HBO when I was growing up a lot, and I remembered it because they had the earworm scene, and that really messed me up as a kid. So I was like, that stuck in my, no pun intended, stuck in my head. But yeah. And then I just started watching. I watched a lot of the '90s, all of them, the series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. I got into Voyager and got like halfway through that before I was like starting to get off to like later high school years and college. And of course, my whole focus changed to do everything else besides sitting down and keeping up with Star Trek. So I never finished Voyager. And so I missed the 2000s ones, like the ends of Voyager. Enterprise, I never saw. What was the other one with
Was Deep
Captain?
Space Nine after that?
No, Deep Space Nine was part of the '90s kind of like trilogy of Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager.
Yeah,
I
and then
think.
Enterprise.
Yeah, Enterprise was the one. Bakula, Scott Bakula was the one I meant. Yeah, was Captain Janeway? That was Voyager, right?
That
Yeah,
was Voyager, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, so I stopped at like right through probably the first quarter to half of or first third of Voyager's run is where I knew 7 of 9 and like started to get that whole early thing, but then kind of didn't pick that up. But yeah, I've been back in since the Paramount stuff, and yeah, I like Discovery. It's funny you said about Discovery. I fell off somewhere in the middle. Like I tried to do season 3, and I started to fall off there. Season 4, I really didn't do like at all. So yeah, I'm behind on that one because yeah, when they settled in, I liked them being the edgier, take risks, kind of big storylines, messing with stuff and pushing boundaries and stuff. And when they tried to settle in and basically become like a Strange New Worlds, like I was just like, I'm not so much for that. But no, this has been my favorite. Strange New Worlds has been my favorite new Star Trek show. I mean, of the batch of the new ones, and my favorite Star Trek in years, and ranks really highly up there with my favorite series. because it does everything I loved about this, and like what made me start to love sci-fi, which is have like really good thought-provoking parables and storylines and ideas that are also given the best production values we've seen for these kinds of stories in this franchise. So yeah, man, this was a really good season, pound for pound, now that I'm thinking about it. And it's it's kind of like really funny. This was also a season where we saw some really unexpected characters like kind of really stand out. I didn't expect like Nurse Chapel and Doctor. I was kind of crazy. I'm trying to Mbanga. Like
Yeah,
I didn't expect them to step into like and have so many some of the strongest episodes, like from the pilot or not pilot, but the first premiere series season two premiere episode when they're like fighting those Klingons and they take the Hulk juice and they're like battling. Shout out to Jess Bush for letting her face get like beat to crap and having all like the cuts and makeup. To the probably one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek ever, if I'm being honest, is the one with my guy from the Wire, with Buddy from the Wire as the Klingon dignitary who like the peace guy who had reformed from being one of the worst kind of generals. That whole episode was so fantastic, and yeah, I can't sit here and do this. I gotta pull this up on like IMDb so I can talk about these episodes because, like I
that
said, Star Trek, man, it's like all jargon.
it's certainly one of the things that I appreciated most. And again, my knowledge is, I wouldn't describe it as minimal, but in terms of the deep cut characters, I was somebody who didn't know Nurse Chapel or Joseph Mbenga, that they even number like number ones from the original pilot that never aired. But what I really liked in terms of this season, and it's interesting given one of the things one of the producers had to say that I'll get into later, which is both seasons are 10 episodes. Something that I do enjoy about streaming service TV is the seasons are shorter. And in theory, that should result in better production values throughout everything: writing, directing, acting. You're going to get better talent because you're not working for a cable show for 24 years, 20, I almost said 24 years, 24 episodes and whatnot. But constructing the whole season where each episode focuses on a different character, so you really get to get invested into that one character's point of view and see exactly what they're going through. So every time you see them again throughout the season, you know what they've been going through and you can track each individual's character arc. And it's something that when you are telling the story of an ensemble, on occasion some characters can get left behind. And the fact that you start off with Umbanga and Nurse Chapel taking, as you mentioned, the Hulk juice and tracking that through, and their traumatic experiences that they experienced during the Klingon War, and that being something carrying through, because at the end of the first season, I'm fairly certain, was there was a peace was doctored between the two species, or I guess the Federation and the Klingons. And so we get the focus more on the Gorn, which have been redesigned to actually be scary because it's not a dude wearing a hat or a Halloween mask. But even with specific episodes focusing on such real world things, and that's been a constant as I've done my sort of history reading through of Star Trek, where it's always been talking about real world issues. And it's one of the best aspects of science fiction, which is addressing topics that may or may not get to viewers who are not watching something that is quote unquote progressive, but handling subject matter that's really serious. The episode that immediately shocked me into a realization that this season was going to be something special was episode 2, when we had number 1 having to do her court case and dealing with what is just the morality of law. And the fact that it was able to address these issues in such a complete specific sense to things that are so applicable to what's going on specifically on our side of the planet right now was phenomenal. I tweeted out that I think it's that episode in particular, and I'd only been 2 episodes in, but it just sticks in my mind with everything this episode has to say. And that my kids are too young to watch this stuff right now, but the fact that there's things like this made that may get to somebody who's not necessarily with the same viewpoint, but having it presented in the science fiction realm sometimes makes, I don't know if it's a pun at all, but that pill easier to swallow, and some realization may come from that. And if that does, great. And if it doesn't, it's still a wildly entertaining piece of television. And each episode does something different like that, and encapsulates a different aspect of science fiction. There's a time travel episode. There's a musical episode. Of course, you mentioned the episode with I had the Ambassador Dakra, so the Klingon played by the actor from The Wire, and what Chapel and Mbenga were going through, and that trauma comes to a head in that episode. It's something that I think a lot in my personal life, I don't have anybody who's served in my uh, group of friends or close family members, but that level of PTSD from what somebody's gone through, and having different characters and perspectives, different perspectives on dealing with the trauma, and ultimately how it's the conclusion of that episode. There are threads that I'm looking forward to seeing in season 3. And this seems to be the year of anything where we get more than I would like to be continueds, which I was not expecting from this show. We've already had it
Oh
from
yeah,
two feature films this year.
yeah.
And given the fact that the strikes are happening, who knows when season 3 will get, well, written being the first thing, and then
Oh yeah.
acted
It's
is but that for me, just like I said with Mission Impossible and Across the Spider-Verse, the story that was told was so good that regardless of ending on a cliffhanger, and this is TV, I would say it's more forgivable given how you're going into season 3, which typically can be the make or break for a show continuing a longer run. That every character that I wanted to get to know more from, being somebody who has such a vague knowledge of the TOS crew, was enhanced with what they did with all of them, which is something I really appreciated. Not to mention the fact that the finale introduces a character that, and I tweeted this a couple days ago, I audibly yelled at my TV when it was revealed who that character was, because I was so excited he was now a part of this version of the Star Trek universe.
yeah. No, that was great. That was great. Yeah, I think what stood out to me is, and I'm just been kind of getting my thoughts together in real time here, but is just how well they subverted my expectations. Like each episode, like you said, there's a lot that's familiar Star Trek territory, but they did in a very good way. Like the whole episode that I kind of, it came, I just looking over the episode titles again and just seeing like, yeah, when Lon and goes to that basically the alternate timeline, and you're like, oh, it's an alternate timeline episode, like it's a Wonderful Life type thing, and like you're like, okay, but that episode's like so deep about like the bond she forms with Kirk and how they kind of fall in love, and then he dies and she has to just, for reasons of TVA authority, you have to just hold on to that, like you're gonna have to hold that, and just like her trying to like awkwardly bond with him, like you said, the way they would do these deep episodes for each character that then carried across the season was just so masterfully woven in. So every time, like we as the audience, like every time then Kirk just made a phone call and like the main timeline would be like, the will they won't they of it all that doesn't exist for this other guy, really. The stuff with number one and that court case episode, which when I first got the two screeners, I got the first two episodes to see, and I was just like, yeah, the first one was such a good, the first one, first of all, like what a balls move they just did, where they literally take the main character that carries the show and have him be like, "Oh, I'm just sitting this one out. Like I got other stuff to do." I got other stuff to work on, so you guys handle this one. It's just like
Would it
their
have been
premiere.
Doctor Strange?
What?
Would he have been shooting Doctor Strange?
Um,
Does that line up?
he I'm not sure if he was. I don't.
Man,
I'm not quite sure because I know
I
he
don't
only
think
did
so.
like I think he was only there for like a day to shoot Doctor Strange, and I don't think he was with anybody else. But I just I mean, I think it wasn't even. It could have been logistics, but I think it was just also written in because he's going to number one's like home world to.
Mhm.
He's got to travel out there and do that whole nine. But yeah, and just let the crew cook without Captain Pike is just something really, really. They trust their ensemble now, and so it is well done how they balance things. So like the Uhura episode is like so well done. The Lawn episode is so well done. The number one, I mean, the real star was the female lawyer in that one, who they did a good job with the writing because you know a courtroom drama only is as good as how the lawyers each build their case, and the way that lady kind of slowly builds that case and brings it around to the point to defend, like you know how she kind of loopholes her way back into Starfleet service is just it was really well done. But I think the evidence of how well they wrote this season and how funny it was, things got lost at Comic Con. So I didn't even know that it was a surprise that they were doing the crossover episode, which I've had to sit on for a long time before it was even announced to the public. I got to interview the Lower Decks cast at Comic Con 2022, and I was like, "Look, I know what you're up to." And I was like, just tell me about it. And this was right before they were going downstairs to tell like the world. And they were like, oh, they were like, you know. I was like, buddy, I'm Team Paramount. Of course I know. Like, you know.
Our
And so
paychecks have the
yeah.
same thing on it.
Yeah. I guess so I had like Tawny and Jack Quaid and like they were just like, oh man. And they're like, yeah, I should replay those interviews. Those were good. But yeah, I that surprise so that little crossover episode when they bring his character, I always forget the name of his character, but when they bring the Lower Decks characters over to Strange New Worlds, it's so masterful in that episode how this comedic character that Jack Quaid's playing actually begins to touch upon like all the different things that affected everybody throughout the season, like right he like is bouncing through the ship and all he like kind of completely changes the trajectory of the Nurse Chapel Spock thing that we've been watching build up and
Mhm.
completely like ruins that with the Spock smiling thing. You know, number one finds out that she's gonna be like really, really good in like really on all the posters and all that's validation. Ahura also learns that she should get over her anxieties because she's going to become like this really like badass person. Like it's just, it's so masterfully done the way they just kind of like you said balanced out all these storylines that let you know in the background of other episodes how these people are feeling still, and then even do things like this comedic kind of one-off bottle episode using time travel in the weirdest way to push the characters forward like mentally, emotionally,
Mhm.
and do all that because of what they know about time travel with the worst time traveler who's not supposed to reveal anything but keeps revealing stuff and just like telling people things. So yeah, man, it was just really well done. And as I'm looking over the episode titles, like I said, I think it was just in the heat of summer. This was just like the show that I could always count on to like just be that hour of TV that I was going to really enjoy. But yeah, that Kirk and Lon episode was really good.
What I loved about that was of Toronto is not far from me, and my sister is a diehard Vampire Diaries fan, or was. That was her show when she was growing up, like going through high school. And I can't she I think a friend of hers has said Paul Wesley is just in Toronto. Like obviously that's where the show shoots, and so that was not overly a surprise. And she's like, no, he's just walking around like dressed as Kirk. And so being somebody who knows when something's just Toronto, being USA anywhere, I was really curious what they were going to pose it as. And the fact they're like, we're just in Toronto. Let's just say it's Toronto. We'll throw a couple of bridges over it. It'll be fine. I really appreciated. And then the fact that I got to see our Monopoly colored money is amazing because I think that's probably the first time Star Trek has ever been in Canada. I'd have to look that up. Somebody listening to this may know, but to my knowledge, they've never been in Canada before. And
No, I mean, I know France. I mean, I know Europe. I know definitely America,
yeah,
obviously. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't know if they've ever been in Canada. You might be right about that.
Well, and you talked about the crossover episode. So I don't watch Lower Decks. There's only so much time, and a Star Trek cartoon that I'm sure is quite funny just falls through the cracks for me. So it was something I was looking forward to. And what it really reminded me of was, I know you are also a DC fan, was when one of the legions of superheroes makes it to the Justice League timeline, right? And it's like, oh, there's statues of you in my present and not messing anything up. It was really funny. And I like what you mentioned about where all of the things that are moving forward. And that is always in the back of my brain, just out of curiosity, because this show, that conceivably they could run it for 10 years, but at some point there is an end date similar to, and I was going to plug this at the end, but it kind of works into something. An article I just was reading of yours before we started this about Ahsoka's what to watch to prepare for Ahsoka, and how these series do have an end point. At some point, this is spoilers for Star Trek's Strange New Worlds future. Pike's gonna wind up in the chair, the Iron Man, the Iron Mandolin. Um, and we know Kirk's going to take over. I mentioned it earlier. Scotty showed up. My reaction to that was watching the finale, and as soon as he walked out, there was a tease of somebody with a Scottish accent, I believe in season one, but it never amounted to anything. But then he walks out explaining his not his don't get detect his non-Gorn detector with a Scottish accent, and my brain was going, to my knowledge, nobody else has a Scottish accent in this entire Starfleet Academy. So this can only be Montgomery Scott. I hope this is him. I hope this is him. And the scene just goes on and on. And then finally, Pike asks for what his name is, and he said it, and I shouted at my TV because it's another member of the crew we're eventually going to get. So I'm like, obviously, they've talked about one of the things, this is a long segue around, is the continuity, to my knowledge, has been maintained so well because of they're using a time period that has only been vaguely spoken about in TOS.
Yeah,
And so that I appreciate because it's not something you have to worry about. But at some point, we are going to get to meet the other members of the bridge crew.
yeah.
Did
But I
you
like how
like
they're
the music?
peppering him. What's
Go
that?
ahead. Sorry. No, go
No.
ahead.
Oh man, we're really gonna do this. So I read about the musical episode. I never made it through the musical episode. I can't do musical episodes. I
No.
really, I've never. I mean, you know what? Since like I said, I like to keep it transparent. I've never done any of the musical episodes, guys. I've never did the Buffy musical episode. I never did any of the musical episodes. I watched like the first season of Glee. That was about all I could get through. And yeah, I just don't. I do not enjoy musicals that much. So there's only one musical I watch religiously, and that is The Nightman Cometh, and that's about it.
That's fair. It reminded me of the Supergirl Flash crossover. What that episode was called off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Yeah, no, I dipped out of that. I lasted about 10 minutes in that, and I was like, "Yo, no, yeah, no." And don't get me
But
wrong, I like some Lloyd and Webber. Like I like some good theater, but like, yeah, I just can't do musical TV for some reason.
that's fair. Well, the immersion is certainly different than seeing it on stage or seeing it on the big screen. So that's fair. One of the things that I liked about the musical was that, similar to, like, I think a lot more that the fandom for this would be exposed to, is like it's just characters talking in song, and it gives us an opportunity to kind of check in with everybody, which again, like having each episode focus on somebody like one main character and then getting sort of snippets of everyone else's story. One thing that was disappointing, and I've seen this written about on sites, is that episode 8 ends with Umbenga killing Dakra, the Klingon ambassador, and obviously there's no song about him being like super depressed with the fact that, or even happy with the fact that he just killed this guy. And so it's certainly something I'm looking forward to them exploring in season 3, but I it's yeah, I think if you're somebody who has had a hard time getting into Star Trek, just watching, I guess you would need Discovery, I think, to become more acquainted with this version of the Enterprise. But watching season 2 of Discovery and then this, I think it manages to balance the modern sensibilities of story, like anthology storytelling, while still having some of the serialized elements and still touching on the things that are so classically Star Trek, like you talked about the time travel parallel. They haven't done a mirrored event universe yet, but I guess we already did that in Star Trek Discovery, so they may not be addressing that again. But leading to the Gorn being this ultimate villain, I'm really curious how long they can manage to keep that going, because in this they
Oof.
now have weapons where they can just kill them,
Yeah.
and so it's like you have your MacGuffin weapons now.
Yeah.
I like that's something that I was thinking about, because like I mentioned it earlier, the season does end on a cliffhanger where there is a planet's worth of populace has been energized onto a Gorn ship, with they declaring it this is Gorn space, and so they're about to go into battle after that. That's the to be continued, which is a good cliffhanger, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do moving forward. But I'm curious if, because we had that time travel episode with, what is his name, Brad Boimler,
Bombler. Yeah.
Jack Quaid, touching on what those characters are, or what those people are in history to him. If there's going to be a pivot to where these characters, I mean, that's it's more so what's the season end game? Are we going 5? Are we going 6? Are we going 10?
Yeah, and like I'm kind of curious because I think people are going to fall in love with these characters, but it's going to be like eventually Pike's story has to run out, and it's about like what do you do with the series then? Do you just end Strange New Worlds with Pike's story? Do you go into this kind of like weird alternate timeline take on the original series? Like what with these characters continuing on? Like that's going to be a big question. I'm kind of really curious how they do because ostensibly you can keep this cast and this crew of characters together and people love them from Strange New Worlds, but like yeah, then you're getting into all the kind of questions of continuity and stuff like that, which is already obviously kind of splintered because you can't you can't claim that like the Gorn we're seeing now and everything the Gorn are doing in any way, shape, or form kind of match up to what the original series did with the Gorn. So it's kind of a tricky thing to, but I'm wondering if they'll do it because I mean it'd be an easy cash cow just to be like, hey, we're back to like Star Trek, just good old the original Star Trek again. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see
As
because the
someone
whole
who's Go ahead.
oh no, sorry, I was just gonna say because the whole universe kind of running out of they got to come up with some new ideas because they're running out of room like pretty quickly here for
It's
pretty much
because, yeah, I don't, again, somebody will know, because this is not something I track. It's something I don't like to track with, unless it's very specific to when we're pointing this, like when the show is making a point of saying it. But given the fact that Pike was introduced to his end game in Star Trek Discovery, yeah, in Discovery, and so he knows what that is, that continuing to just kick the ball down the street, like we'll get to it, we'll get to it. Eventually that character's going to run out of things to do just creatively. Like, what's up with Pike? Oh, he's waiting to die. Anything else? No. we've we've run out of things to him for him to do, and it's been somebody who's watched series run longer than they probably should. It would be really interesting if they just do a 5 season run and we just get Star Trek TOS. But again, being somebody who's
Those old
never,
scientists.
yeah, being somebody who's never watched it, it's something I'd be on board for because I've now not accepted because it sounds like they have to. I have to accept them, but I don't. But these versions of these characters work, and clearly the fandom has embraced these recasts. And again, I would really appreciate if the other Star thing would do this well. But again, it doesn't come down to just casting the right person, but it's all of the everything involved with this show. Like this doesn't look like it's shot in a shoebox. And the production values are good. Like obviously they're going to have to use green screen because Toronto cannot be everywhere. It can be most US cities, but eventually you're going to have to go somewhere in the stars. And this, for there being such, there's so little time to watch big premiere TV. This being one of those things that, as you mentioned, I was really looking forward to, even though I binged it kind of 2 episodes a day, just so I had more of it to watch later. I really appreciated that. Clearly, the care and effort putting into this, the results are there in front of you. You're not like even if you're not a fan necessarily of the musical, like everything was original music, and for that you get to embrace that. You get portions of an animated episode from Lower Decks if you're a fan of that. Like the respect for the fandom is something that I think these big IPs can often struggle with from time to time. There's a lot of other franchises that think just nostalgia cookies are going to be good enough. And unfortunately, I think most people would say that's not really going to work anymore because there's way too much stuff. There's too many TV shows, there's too many movies. Even as somebody who does this on my own, I don't have enough time in the day for all the things I want to watch. I know on a relatively recent episode of Podcast X, the three of you were talking about Silo. I can't wait to watch that with everybody who's involved, but there's only so much time. And so getting the having an intellectual property, a brand with Star Trek being something that I haven't been invested. I said Star Trek, I'm pretty sure. Invested in my whole life. Like
You
I'm
did?
so grateful that the pockets of these 10 episodes did come out when they came out because even as busy as the summer was, like we had a crazy June and then everything kind of started to teeter into you may not love this as much. Obviously there was Barbenheimer and I guess Saw Patrol's coming up, but I don't think that's going to be nearly as interesting. So, I'm glad that at least one of these streaming services is clearly putting in the work to their flagship property.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's a good thing they did because the timing couldn't have been better because, like you said at the beginning, it's going to be a long stretch for that next Star Trek. And right now, there's a lot of things. I can't even remember the amount of things that they've already kind of announced are coming. I know we're getting that Section 33. I know we're getting some other stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited. It's more like excitement for things that are kind of sort of happening. It's like, yeah, Discovery's kind of wearing out. Picard's over. I mean, if like we get well, man, I'm just like starting to get tired, but I'm trying to remember what the name of the next show they basically backdoor piloted it in Picard's finale was going to be called
I have here
Star Trek
Starfleet
Legacy.
Academy. Oh,
uh
okay.
yeah, they're making a show about that, but Star Trek Legacy, I think, or something was what people wanted the next one to be,
Well, like
because I think they were
TNG
going to,
2.0.
yeah, like, yeah, big, yeah, basically, because the finale introduced like the sons and daughters of a lot of characters from TNG and like had them become a crew, and the older guard got new status quos within Starfleet. So that would be exciting because I loved the last season of Picard and what it did. And yeah, then there's this with like the whole, do we go TOS and do that whole thing? Because I would love them to do that actually, because I would love to see the Khan saga from like now that I know Lon. I would love to see like kind of anything that happens with like whatchamacallits people, like number one and all that. That stuff is so much more interesting. These things that I loved in the original series, I would actually feel like closer to and more invested in now if I saw them kind of addressed. But like in terms of actual concrete content we're getting, yeah, it's not a lot. Like it's not a lot. I don't think we have anything else coming for until what the next last season of Discovery is next.
Yeah, season 5 is the last announced one, and then 30, what is section whatever,
Section
30.
31 or 33, I forget
Yeah,
off the
that
top of my head.
movie has a date. What was the
Yeah,
date?
oh, that's right. They're going the anime. Wow, there's too many franchises to keep up with and too many changes this year because of the strikes. But yeah, that's right. They were going the anime route. They're like, yeah, we might lay off some series and just do some features like on Paramount Plus. They're going to use that Paramount Plus feature button and do that
What
whole
was it?
thing. So,
31 originally going to be a mini series, and then
yeah.
Michelle Yeoh won an Oscar, and they were like, you can have me for a movie." Not, I don't know if that happened, but that's an assumption on my
Oh,
end.
it's definitely yeah. They slept on that too long, and then she won an Oscar, and now they're salty, and they're like, "Oh,
Well, and
yeah, you
then
could have had her."
unfortunately, as somebody who was a fan of two of the three movies from the Kelvin timeline, four's been stuck in development hell forever, and I think it's funny because a lot of properties have not done this where we've had multiple versions. Like, it's happening more so now, so it's possible that you have multiple versions of these characters running around. So
Oh
as
yeah,
some, because there's not really closure to that trilogy, it's just sort of like, oh, because it's, they go on the 5-year journey. So I guess you could count that as an ending, but I mean, it's not a satisfying one. And obviously it was affected with the untimely passing of Anton Yelkin,
yeah. I don't think
right?
any of them are coming back. Yeah, I don't think
So,
any of them are going to come back. I know Chris Pine feels some kind of way about that. I don't think any of them are coming back. I think Zoe Saldana's like,
oh, no
I mean,
way.
she's already getting Paramount money doing with Tyler Sheridan doing that Spec Op show, which is amazing.
Is it
I love
Linus?
that show. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that show's so good. That's like my current like. I'm putting away everything and watching this show every week. Yeah, Zoe Saldana, Nicole Kidman, like yeah, the lady who plays the main character. It is a good show.
Nicole
Anyway,
Kidman. She's from the AMC movie intros,
yeah,
right?
yeah. That lady from the intros is
Agreed.
yeah, she's not being whimsical and spec op. She's hard as nails. Yeah, it's pretty good. So yeah, I'm enjoying that. But no, but Zoe's that's all to say. Zoe isn't coming back for Star Trek. Pine doesn't want to do it because of like he's probably one of the most affected from Anton Yelchin. Carl Urban doesn't need to do any kind of supporting things. He's now got the boys. Like
And he's
I feel
Johnny
like that
Cage.
time. Yeah. Oh,
But
that's right. Oh my god.
Kofi, though, one thing I'd
Oh
like
my
to
god.
ask you, though, and it's a turn
Yeah.
of phrase that I'm fairly certain you invented. What's possible, though, with all the people who want to say no? What can be
Oh,
driven?
the old. Oh, their dump truck full of money, and I did invent that. Yes, thank you. I have 100% invented that, yelling at Robin Ben about Christian Bale, and if he would still play Batman, and people saying, "Oh, he's done," and I was like, "No, but he's done if you put a dump truck full of money up to their house."
It's
Yeah,
true.
now people actually say this a lot. I'm just laugh, but yeah, I mean, it was very true. Like, I mean, that's why people say it because it's like, yeah, I mean, they're like I feel like some fat cat in Hollywood heard that and was like, "Oh yeah, why have I never done it this way? All these suitcases," and he just like got a dump truck.
Yeah. It's been happening with pro athletes forever. Let's just do it for our Hollywood stars.
Yeah,
Right?
just
So
dump the whole thing on their lawn and be like, "You're doing the picture."
yeah.
I'm like, all
You're
right,
going to be in G.I. Joe 2, Channing Tatum, whether you want to be or
yeah,
not.
but I don't think Paramount's gonna dump out. I mean, unless they determine that like audiences are only gonna turn out to see this cast of those characters on a big screen, like I think they're going to spend years testing the waters with just these Paramount Plus features to see if they can't generate significant enough interest in this other universe. And if they can, then you're going to start seeing the Star Trek TV universe just like the old school, just like it was in the first time. The old TV shows are going to be springboarding to the big screen. instead of having to have like separate franchises. But me, I just always am going to be curious about what Tarantino's Star Trek would have been. They'd have
Yeah.
been like going across the universe, but they'd have been like Guardians of the Galaxy. And been Captain Pike would have been in his quarters like, I just love this old record from the 1960s, little known thing that nobody ever knew about. It was called the Disco Kitties. And they'll just be like playing some whole thing over the loudspeakers. It'd be elaborate Star Trek dance sequences. Like, it'd be crazy. So, yeah, a lot of barefoot cadets walking around the halls.
No one's wearing
So,
shoes or boots. Nope. Just,
yeah.
yeah. You have whatever captain set up, crosses his legs, and it's just one long tracking shot of feet. Uh, well, I can think of no better place to end than Quentin Tarantino's love of feet. Uh, Kofi, thank you so much for being on the show. You can find Kofi on. Is it an award-winning podcast yet, or is you still laying the groundwork?
No, still hopefully award-winning podcast, Comic Book Nation. The only show that does it all for geek culture. We have to consume mass amounts of content so we can talk about it all for you, from anime to Marvel, DC, all that stuff. And you can always find me, for legal reasons, just guest hosting on the What Is Podcast X podcast with my old SR Underground buddies, Ben Kendrick and Rob Keys.
All right, thank you so much for being on the show, Kofi. Next week's episode will be a review of the first DCU character, but not the first DCU movie. I don't know how to figure that one out, but it will be of Blue Beetle. So you can look forward to that one. That'll be next week, and you'll have to follow the socials for what's coming up next because things are getting delayed left and right. Maybe just pay people affordable or livable wages, and things would be different. Who knows? That'll do it for this episode of the Film Realist Podcast. I'll see you next time.